Welcome back to Composition and its Allies. My name is Barney. I'm a classical composer, and this is a channel for composers as well as performers interested in composition. In today's episode of Fundamentals of Harmony, I'm going to show you a soprano exercise in the French style for root position chords and a shortcut that I would use to figure it out. Let's begin. The first thing you do before you do anything else after you've copied down the exercise and you verify that you've copied it correctly by hand, you want to sing the exercise at different tempos. So if you need to get your pitches from piano, it's fine, but you got to sing because you want to hear the harmonic tendencies. Do, si, do, fa, re. Notice how the music comes to a pause. Do, si, do, fa, re. Plus as a dotted half note. That's a half cadence. Mi, re, do, si, do. Notice how the music ends leading tone to tonic. That's going to be a perfect authentic cadence. I have a shorts tutorial directly on my website. It's professional level. I have subtitles in which I go in more details on the cadences, but a structural cadence is something that's going to divide the form. So you have a perfect authentic or a plagal cadence to end the piece, or you're going to have usually a half cadence in the middle that's going to divide the piece in two separate parts. Now, it's great that we know the cadences, but we need to commit something on paper. But in order to do that, we have to decide the best octave for the bass. So we can end sol, do, so a descending fifth, or we can rise sol, do. Now, it depends on what key you're in, what range you're in. In this particular example, in C minor, I think just ending with the descending fifth is just going to sound more satisfactory for an ending. Ending with the upper C, it just feels a little bit thin, though harmonically it is no issue. Now we need to figure out the best octave for the bass for the half cadence. Notice if we place that bass, so it's a G, it's a dominant, in a medium register, we have two possibilities. In the first possibility, we have a third between the tenor and the bass and wider spacing on the top. I really love this type of solution, and I find it gives me a lot of flexibility. However, a lot of teachers tend to have a preference for the tighter spacing. But of course, for fugue and orchestration, you need to be able to do both. If I have the low G, notice that there's only one spacing possible. Now I'd like to quickly discuss the minimum and maximum distances. So between the bass and soprano, so the outer voices, the minimum distance you can possibly have is going to be an octave. If you have less than that, you will not have any space or not enough space for the for the alto and the tenor. For this particular exercise, I'm more concerned about the maximum distance between the outer voices because of this low bass. So from the bass to the tenor, the maximum distance you can have is a 12th, though many times that's going to sound thin and wispy, so it's best to stick to a tenth unless you really know what you're doing. When it comes to the upper three voices, so the tenor to the alto or the alto to soprano, the ear is even more sensitive and you can't have more than an eighth. Anything more than an octave, it's just going to feel like you're missing something from the music. So therefore, looking at this, I'm a bit concerned because notice that soprano is doing fa, re, it's leaping and it's descending. And given that we're already in a really low register for the bass, where am I going to approach it from? Because the general desire between the bass and soprano is that they oppose each other. Obviously, it's not always the case. But certainly, if the soprano is leaping, I wouldn't want the bass moving in that same direction because it creates difficulties of understanding what's going on or creates confusion for the listener. Here I wrote out the 4 possible chords in minor. So in harmony in the French style, we only allow 4 possible chords in minor keys for root position chords. So it's the 1, it's the 4, it's the 5. Make sure to raise the leading tone for the 5, and the 6. The other chords for minor keys are not usable because there's either a dissonance or they're more suitable for modulation. This is amazing because it means that you have fewer options, which means that in a way it is easier, but also is more difficult because everything is life and death. Now we need to figure out how we're going to manage these large distances with this low bass. So in this first example, notice that we have good distances with the upper three voices. So we have a 6 from alto to soprano, as well as tenor to alto. And the maximum distance, of course, is an octave between the upper three voices. However, notice that I have a 12th distance from the bass to the tenor. Though I did mention there are times you can have a 12th, generally it's not going to work well because it creates a thin sound to the writing. I definitely don't want to gamble this early on. In this other possibility, notice that I alter that distance from the bass to the tenor. I have a tenth, but as a consequence, I have a tenth between the alto and the tenor, which are the middle voices, and that definitely is going to feel like a gap that needs to be filled in. If I really love this low G, obviously you have to have the low F because you want logical voice leading. I would need to have a 5th voice, which we don't do harmony in French style. You just keep 4 voices because it's the minimum you need to express harmony. But later on, you could, of course, for orchestration, add more voices. So notice that to bring in a 5th voice, I put it in between the tenor and the alto. And notice fa, re, it's just a doubling of the soprano. Before I go to part 2, I want to show you an orchestration that I did just for this channel for about 10 brass players for orchestra. And notice that I took this same progression. I have 2 trombones at the unison for the bass line. The upper trombone is doubling the soprano, but down an octave. Notice for the trumpet, we have the first trumpet doubling soprano at the unison, and the second trumpet is doubling the tenor up the octave. Notice for the French horns, they have 4 total, but 2 different parts. One is doubling the soprano down the octave, the other is the alto. So when we do harmony in the French style, one of the reasons we reduce ourselves to 4 voices is that we see just the most essential relationships. But then, of course, when you orchestrate, you have that freedom to put it in different octaves to get the effects that you want. Now we're going to get to phrases. So just a reminder, in part 1, we figured out the structure. We got the structural cadences, which divided the piece. And now we want to get more of the note by note. What I highly recommend when giving a soprano exercise is to write in the scale degrees, though when you get to modulations, it gets a little bit dicey. But for now, we're just staying in one key. So notice when I write in the scale degrees, I have 1, 7, 1. If I were to voice this as a perfect authentic cadence, it's not acceptable because it's still in the middle of the exercise and it's going to end the piece. Remember, we learned about cadences, about the tutorial on cadences that's available on my website. Another thing to keep in mind is when you have an octave between between the bass and the soprano on the tonic of the key, so in C minor on that C, it basically stops the motion. So therefore, you want to avoid it, even if it's not a perfect authentic cadence, you definitely want to avoid this octave. Therefore, we're going to do a deceptive cadence, and then from there, we just fill in the chord. It has to be a 4, because if we look at the chart of chord possibilities, that's the only possible progression. Plus, it's good to have a 4 before 5. Makes sense. Plus, after a 6, a lot of times we go to 4. Now, this is a hands-on type of learning. Notice that it's not intellectual based. I know it may, hopefully I'm doing a job presenting it. And even if you feel like you're learning something, the learning is really, really superficial. I hate to break it to you. You got to do the work. It's going to be much more difficult, especially when someone isn't guiding you. But that is how the French learn harmony. Now let's get the second phrase. After a half cadence, we often go to the 6th, so we do a deceptive cadence. However, here it does not work. If I do the deceptive cadence, notice that we have parallel fifths, which is not acceptable. Therefore, we go to the first alternative to the deceptive cadence for root position chords, which is the imperfect authentic cadence. Here we have a 5-1, but the third is in the soprano, so there's no risk of ending the piece. And of course, now we don't have those parallel fifths. If you need to review the cadences of root position chords, because I know I'm going a little bit fast, here we're focused more on strategy, then just as a reminder, you can go on my website and check out the tutorial. It is subtitled to make it easier to understand. Plus I have some great brass sounds. Now let's do inventory of the piece. So we basically have everything. Don't forget that shortcut I mentioned at the beginning, which was to just go straight for those cadences. It saved a lot of time instead of going note by note. But now I want to show you another shortcut. So notice that we have fa, re, mi, re, do, do. Notice where we have tonic, tonic. Okay, this is root position chords. There are really not many possibilities. Okay, there's only 4 possibilities, and for tonic, tonic, there's only 3 notes it can belong to. So something you could start doing is noticing these formulas. These exercises I'm doing are actually what I call pre-Chalon. So Chalon is the main harmony workbook that I recommend doing, but it's a little more advanced. These exercises are really just like formulas. If you start to do multiple, you'll see the same patterns just in different keys, but between the soprano and the tenor just reversed, all right? So why don't we look at a previous exercise? And notice the ending, re, do, la, do, re. We have that tonic, tonic. I hope you enjoyed the video. Unfortunately, just watching the video will not do much for harmony. You have to do the work. That's how we learn in French style. You have to do the hands-on work. Fortunately, the exercises are available directly on my website. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.